Warning. Despite what the name may suggest, Cat CPR does not demonstrate how to perform CPR on a cat, though it is understandable that you came here thinking that it does. If your precious kitty cat is having an actual feline medical emergency, then stop listening to this now and contact your veterinarian immediately. However, once the emergency is over, we welcome your return. Thank you.
And look, I get it. People are not going to believe me, but I have actually figured out the secret to understanding all of Scripture from Genesis to Revelation. And all you need to know is...
We're losing him!
Not on my watch.
Clear!
Hello, welcome to Cat CPR. I'm Matt, and as you can tell, we're missing Jeremiah today. Cue the sad noises. He's like my other half, and today, but what we're going to do is we're having an interview. So Jeremiah will be back next episode, where we'll actually be breaking down this episode a little bit more, because we've got a great special guest with us today. We have James Snapp Jr. James, say hi to everybody.
Hello, everybody.
Thanks for joining us. We really appreciate it. So the reason we're having James on today is, as you know, we've been doing a lot of episodes on canon, and the next part of our series that we're going to be doing is on textual criticism. And textual criticism, in my opinion, is probably one of the most important concepts of being able to know if we can actually trust the Bible or not. And I happen to get affiliated with James through some social media channels, got onto his site on, is it New Testament Textual Criticism? Is that the address or the webpage?
NT Textual Criticism.
NT Textual Criticism. That's on Facebook, correct?
Yes.
Okay, great. And I picked up his book as well, and I'll make sure that I put the link in the description, because I got to tell you, James, your book has helped me more than anything else in being able to understand this topic, because to me, this topic is incredibly deep. It's incredibly complicated because it has its own nomenclature. It has its own concepts, and it can be very difficult for the average layperson to understand. So the goal of this podcast is to help take this behemoth of textual criticism and break it down so that the average ordinary person can understand all the concepts and really come back down to answer this one simple question: can I trust my Bible that I'm reading every single day? But James, before we get in, why don't you tell the folks a little bit about yourself and who you are and what your background is in this topic?
Well, I am James Edward Snapp Jr. I was born in 1967 in Wabash, Indiana. At my website, www.jamessnappjr.com. If you look for it, there's a brief bio of me, so you can find out more there. And I was after I graduated from Cincinnati Bible College, I went to the mission field in Belize for 10 years. And after 10 years, my wife and I said, I think the U.S. needs me more than the Belize does. So I since that calling to return and have been in local ministry ever since. I first in Ohio, and now, from 2005 till 2023, I was at Curtisville Christian Church, which is about miles north of Minneapolis. But 2 years ago, after I got the Pfizer vaccine, I had a stroke, and it affected my elocution, so I had to resign from the pulpit. In the meantime, I am writing books and studying the Bible a whole lot. Also, coming on podcasts.
Well, we appreciate that. So you said you went to Cincinnati Bible Seminary? Yeah, so we probably studied under some of the same people. One of the people I had the privilege of studying under was Lewis Foster. Okay, great. And what about like Dr. James Smith? Do you know who he was from Florida Christian?
I know, but never had any of his classes.
Okay. Yeah, he was tremendous. He was my Old Testament and Hebrew professor, so just wonderful. So it's great to have you on. And
wait, I didn't have him West Chester. Sure.
Okay, great. Yeah, because I know he was up in that area. You know, he went to Hebrew Union there in Cincinnati and got his PhD. And my favorite professor, it's a long story, but he's actually the reason that I'm married to my wife, because when I was in college, I was kind of dumb. And he actually called me out on my stupidity in front of the whole class and told me that I needed to marry my wife. So she loves that story. Me, not so much, but he was a great professor for me. And I'd love to actually dive into this, but we don't have time. Maybe we could do it offline or something. You said you had the stroke after the Pfizer vaccine, huh?
Yes.
Oh, wow. Okay. So a lot of things.
I was running Parkways and then to someone's after the vaccine, stroke.
Oh, wow. I'm really sorry to hear that, but I'm glad that you're still out there doing this because, we need people like you with your expertise out there defending the faith. So we really appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, you got to take what comes out its hand, whether it's sweet or sour.
That's right. You have to. Absolutely. Absolutely. So for our listeners, what we did is I actually created a whole bunch of questions. I've been going through James's book. I've been going through a few other people's books and studying this topic out. I sent James a bunch of questions that I think that I had, but then also I know that other people would have about these things. And he sent me back a very detailed answer of these questions. And so I don't know if we're going to be able to, I think this is going to be more of an organic conversation and we're going to flow through things. So I might be switching over to some notes here time and again, trying to find answer or finding more questions to ask. But I thought we would just go ahead and start off with the first question that we have here, which is, James, some people think that, and I've seen lots of social media reels about this, that the Bible was created through a gigantic game of telephone. Right? That, Paul wrote down some things and then other people wrote it down, or maybe just Paul said things, Jesus said things, and people tried to write it down. And by the time it finally got to us, the Catholics had their way with it, and it just confirms Catholic doctrine. And the real Bible that we should have doesn't even exist, and we can't even figure out what it was. So is the Bible, did it come about through, like I said, a gigantic game of telephone? Is that even remotely true?
Well, the short answer is no, but I should probably give you more details.
Sure. That'd be great.
To look into it from a distance, almost anything looks true, like a whale can look like a camel from far enough away.
Mm-hmm.
But telephones are audible, and the Bible was given in hand tool form, writing. So they're not the same thing, just by the nature. When you have a written transcription, you have the guys writing it, you have the people proofreading it, and you have the one who is plugging all the pages together and is sewing them together into a book. So it's not as if a translator today has to rely on the guy that came right before. When you have a telephone game where it's pretty much spreading gossip, and the tale goes for this person, this person, this person, that's different when you have a letter in hand that's being handed from one person to another. Each person can copy the letter and try to get it right. That's what scribes were trained to do. The scribes, most of them, did not have a theological agenda because the job is to simply make good copies. They're supposed to be an untaking machine, like a Xerox machine. That's basically what the ideal scribe is. But we don't have to say, well, let's just rely on the copy that we had got from the guy that got the story before me, because we have access to copies that go back quite far toward the original sources. We can access manuscripts, versions, and lectionaries. I'll get to one lectionary later. Other sources of data about the U.S. that can take us back to text usually through the 300s. So when we say telephone game, it's not as if we have only one telephone, and it's not as if we have only one number. We can call back and consult other people who are closer to the source.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's a really important point. When when I was a little kid and we played telephone, you had to rely, number one, on the person's memory before you and how well they actually spoke so that you could hear what they were actually speaking. It's totally different when you're looking at writing. I mean, when we're looking at writing, the memory is perfect for what that person wrote down. And so having these sources going back, to the, like you said, to the 300s, and maybe even little fragments that go back earlier than that, lets us be able to see what was actually written and not depending upon somebody else's memory. And then I'm sure we're going to get into this because we have questions about this a little bit later. The sheer volume and diversity of the different streams help us to be, that's actually an asset when we're trying to figure out what the original writing is, correct?
Yes, the more manuscripts you have, the better. But it's also to balance that out, because you do have what's called the grouping manuscripts, where if you look at a little cluster of manuscripts that has the same unusual reading in common, then you can deduce that these must all go back to the same source.
Mm-hmm.
Especially if they have not just one thing in common, but dozens and dozens. But nobody claims that we don't have any idea what Plato really wrote, and his works are older than the Gospels. So I think that somebody has wanted to invent a reason to challenge the viability of the New Testament and didn't really think through how bad of an analogy the telephone game is.
Yeah, it's a horrible analogy, and I'm really glad you bring that up. And it also brings up something that I think is interesting. You know, nobody, like you said, nobody doubts the works of Plato or Homer or any of the other things that we have from antiquity. But people,
well, there are some areas of the question, but nobody says we don't have any idea what Homer or Plato wrote.
Exactly, yeah. And thanks for the clarification on that. But, you know, the Bible does stand out because, you know, Plato isn't necessarily stating that these are the inerrant words of the gods. Neither is Homer. But, you know, we are stating that the message as written down in the autographs, and we'll discuss more about autographs versus copies later. But we are stating that what was written down in the autographs are the very words of God. So it does actually create more examination and a higher bar possibly for the scriptures, for the Bible, as it does other books, correct?
Yes, certainly. As you saw in the book of Revelation, John said, he who writes these things down, make sure you write very carefully, because he who takes away or adds there'll be consequences.
Did the scribes pay attention to that warning?
Not very well.
So that creates the problem, which is why we're having this podcast and why there's been so many things written about this topic. So, one thing I want to ask. I saw this reel the other day, and I looked at it this morning in preparation just to make sure I had it written down. I see these reductive reels that are done by people of faith. And I know why they do it. They do it because it's something that's designed to help increase their faith in the Bible. But the statement that it makes, so I had this written down. It states that the text of the New Testament has been established to 99% certainty. And out of the 138,000 words, only 1% of those words are even in doubt, and none of them impact any doctrinal areas whatsoever. Now, I have read your book, and we have communicated back and forth, and I know that you have quite an opinion on this, and I share your opinion. And I think it's damaging to shy away from these questions, because if we tell people false information, then it's going to make us look very unreliable, maybe even like we're trying to hide something in the evidence. And people are going to, with the ubiquitous nature of information out there on social media, people are going to find stuff. They're going to find information. The algorithms are going to make sure of it. So is that statement accurate? 99% of the text has been verified. Only 1% is in doubt, and none of it affects doctrinal areas.
Again, the short answer is no, that's not true. But I probably should give more detail.
Yeah, absolutely.
Ever since Kenyon back in the early 1900s, there's been this line going around that says, "Oh, there are variants, but those are minor. They don't really affect doctrine." But and today, the guys like James White and Dan Wallace, they are saying very similar things. I think that Dan Wallace said, "Oh, of all the variants we have, the viable variants, those don't affect doctrine."
So that's how they get around that conversation. They had some qualifiers, right?
Yes. When you read so make sure you read the fine print when you are listening to Dan Wallace.
Gotcha.
But for instance, Dan Wallace, well, I won't get into that too far. But Damos has some serious mistakes that he makes in some of his analysis. But regarding the New Testament, as far as the doctrine goes, if you believe that God did not lie, and that God guided the writers to speak truth and not error, then you'll have a problem with one of the major manuscripts that says in Matthew 13:35 that Isaiah was the author of Psalm 72. Because, what was it? That was Asaph. Likewise, in Mark 6:22, you'll have a problem with guys like Damos who seem to be content with telling people that the daughter who danced was Herod's daughter instead of Herodias' daughter.
The daughter of who? I'm sorry?
The daughter of Herodias, Salome.
Okay. Yeah.
Now, Damos says, oh, well, we should say there was Herod's daughter anyway because our best manuscripts say that. But and that is one of the worst reasons you could have for arguing for reading.
Yeah, so and that brings up an interesting point because you said, if we believe that God didn't lie and that everything that we have is completely accurate now, it does create problems because there are variants, and some of these variants are substantial. They do make a difference, and you mentioned one, Isaiah being the author of Psalm 72, right? So no, there are explanations for things, and I get that, but what I see a lot of times, and I don't have my Bible right here, but I see people holding up a Bible and they say, this Bible I have in my hand is inerrant. And I cringe inside because I know for a fact it's not. I mean, I've got my Hebrew Bibles up here on the bookshelf. I've got my Greek New Testaments up here on the bookshelf. Both of us could open these up, look at the bottom of any page, and at the bottom of any page, what do we see? We see variant readings. And sometimes we see a lot of them. So pretending that they don't exist and pretending that they're not something that need to be explained, I think, like you're mentioning, it's not a good approach. So I think that's great. And I don't know how many of those we're going to get into today, but even though there are variant readings, and some of them they might impact doctrine, like for one, and what I think we're going to get into this one, what did God say when Jesus was immersed? Some people like to make a mountain out of a molehill. And I don't know if we'll have time for this one. I'd love to have you back sometime to discuss actual specifics because I love the work you've done on John 8 and on Mark 16. I think it's fantastic. But another one that I think is really good, that we do need to discuss, I think sometime, was Jesus speared before or after he died when he was on the cross? That's a big one.
That is a good one because that's in Matthew 27:49, and that's a very that is in Vaticanus and Sinaiticus, the two manuscripts that the NIV is based on, mainly, not exclusively. But back in the 1800s, Hort proposed that error in the variant should be at least in the footnote. As an alternative text.
Yeah, so this is going to bring us, and we're not there yet, but the dependence, but the next question I'm going to ask is about the streams. The dependence on the Alexandrian stream is primary, and specifically Vaticanus and Sinaiticus. We'll get in. We'll define all these terms for folks, so don't worry. We're not gonna jump on ahead without defining terms. Actually creates a problem. And I just got done reading your chapter last week on who Hort was. I had no idea he had the personal life that he did, which I think when you're dealing with textual criticism, I think somebody's biases and maybe personal life and maybe agenda should be brought out, and you brought that out. And again, maybe we'll discuss that here in a little bit. But I'd like us to define, if you wouldn't mind, the difference between the Alexandrian and the Byzantine stream, because I'm going to ask you a question about the problem with the Greek New Testament, and those are the two that primarily get brought up. So what is the Byzantine versus the Alexandrian stream?
Okay. Well, when people ask what's the Greek New Testament that's used today, there's more than one Greek New Testament that's used today, because there's the King James, the New King James, the EMV, those are following the text receptus, which is primarily, not exclusively, but primarily a Byzantine stream. That's the text that's used in the Byzantine Empire, and that was also used in Byzantine monasteries, which reflects most of the time in Matthew through Jude over 90% of the manuscripts.
Okay, so the Byzantine stream you said represents 90% of the manuscripts from Matthew to Jude.
Yes.
Wow, that's a lot. Wow. Okay, I didn't know it was that many. And by the way, what we mean by streams, we mean the copies of the New Testament really boil down to a few different streams. In other words, and you mentioned the point in the one of the answers you gave me is that it's not necessarily where they came from, but where they dominated and where they were used. Okay, so you're talking Byzantine Empire, so Turkey, Syria, that area.
Yep.
Okay.
Also, islands of Crete, Cyprus, any place where the Orthodox Church spread to.
Okay, got it.
So eventually, that includes Egypt, but it takes a while.
Yeah, I mean, they just can't send an email and say, hey, here's the next letters that Paul wrote, guys.
So there's the Byzantine stream, which you see in the King James and New King James mainly. But also, you see the Alexandrian stream, which is in Alexandria, Egypt, and Lower Egypt, Upper Egypt. But this is a stream that tends to be shorter. And also, that's the one that the NIV, ESV, New Revised Standard, and New Living are based on.
Okay. And so the Greek New Testament that we have, and I know, like you mentioned, there's not just one. The one I have on my shelf is the United Bible Society. I think it's version 4. And I know they've come out with more. That's what I got in college, and I just stuck with it. Bruce Metzger was one of the main guys that edited that, and you kind of shook my world with Bruce, because I always used to put Bruce up on a pedestal without ever studying a whole lot, because I always heard people say, "Yeah, he's the best, he's the greatest, he's wonderful," and he was. I mean, he was a good textual critic, but everybody has pluses and minuses in their approaches and their biases and those types of things, but. When we talk about the Greek New Testament today, and I know there's many, what are the problems that we see with the different versions of the Greek New Testament that are used? And we say Greek New Testament, this is what the translators use. They don't sit down with the manuscripts. They use a New Testament in book form, and they sit down and they translate that from Greek to English or whatever language they're translating from. So what are the issues that we see with the various Greek New Testaments that are used today?
Okay. True problems. First, the Nestle Island text relies so heavily on the Alexandrian text that its compilers basically pushed aside the Byzantine text on the assumption that it was a combination that was made in the early 200s or later. Not much later. But because they have this bias thing that anything that's uniquely Byzantine can't be true, they overemphasize the Alexandrian text and make the same mistakes that the compilers made of omitting some things that the apostles and prophets wrote.
Okay, so what's wrong with choosing? I could hear somebody ask the question, what's wrong with choosing the Alexandrian text over the Byzantine text? Is it more accurate? In my Bible, like most people's Bible, you have little footnotes on certain passages to say the oldest manuscripts don't contain these verses. And typically what they mean, if you correct me if I'm wrong, are like maybe the big three, Sinaiticus, Vaticanus, and Alexandrinus, right? And those are all Alexandrian, aren't they?
Well, no. In the Gospels, Alexandrinus is mostly Byzantine.
Interesting.
It's the other two, Sinaiticus and Vaticanus. Those are the two that are mainly Alexandrian, and those are the two that Western Hort in 1881 relied on most of the time. They said, well, Hort wrote in his introduction, every year, he wrote that anytime Vaticanus and Sinaiticus agree. What they say together should be taken as original unless there's very strong internal evidence to the contrary.
So what's wrong with that approach?
Well, it puts too much focus on these two manuscripts, and he ignores the voice of all the others. It's kind of like a built-in. Once you've done that and have these heavyweights, you weigh the manuscripts, and then the axiom, we must weigh the manuscripts, not count them. But I would say it's not an either-or process. You can do both.
Gotcha. So what I hear you saying is that maybe older isn't always better. We need to take a look at the entirety of the evidence. So why wouldn't we trust a 4th century manuscript over, say, an 8th or 9th century manuscript? Why would we want to give equal weight to both? Because we're much further removed from the source.
Well, part of the reason is it has nothing to do with the age of the manuscripts, but the carefulness with which the text was copied. What it comes down to is how dedicated was the copyist to simply transmitting the text and not changing anything.
Gotcha. So
when you have an editor in the picture, then you have the question of age being basically irrelevant. When we say age of manuscripts, many people sometimes assume that means, oh, the older the better. But in real life, age is not really a factor as much as other things. When I've studied parts of Sinaiticus and compared them to the medieval manuscripts, and time after time, and my Latin analysis, using the Nestle Island text as the standard, the medieval manuscript has the better text, more accurate text. So questions are, how well were the copies copied, and how well were they proofread?
Interesting. So you'd rather
that's very important.
So you'd rather take a younger manuscript where they exercise more care than an older manuscript where maybe they weren't as careful in their copying. That makes a lot of sense. And so without getting into too many of the weeds, how can you tell that, say, an 8th or 9th century manuscript, a younger manuscript, that stream or that line took more care in copying of the original than, say, something that is older like a Sinaiticus?
Well, one way is tell by how well has it been proofread, and how well it agrees with other manuscripts. Because if you have two different lines, well, let me read through a story. If a man had a manuscript that he sent out to 3 cities, and the scribes in all 3 cities copied the manuscript, and time went by, and the original manuscripts wore out because they were made of papyrus, and papyrus doesn't last very long. Then you would have 3 different sets of copies, and later on, my somebody said, well, I wonder if they all agree. It would take samples. So Vaticanus and Sinaiticus are good samples of what was in Egypt. But we also have good samples from what was in the areas where the copies were originally sent to. And when we have those copies, we see differences.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I would say what we need to do is not have this artificial weighing, but to consider all streams and then look at them internally to see which one has the original reading, whether they disagree.
That makes a lot of sense. And so I don't necessarily want to get into this at this particular point. It's going to be a little bit later. There has to be a reason why Hort and the folks during the 1800s really pushed for the Alexandrian over the Byzantine. You know, again, the Byzantine being the foundation mainly for the Textus Receptus, the King James Version. And I've read your book, so I understand a little bit of this, but, I'm going to make a note to come back and talk about that here in a moment. So the thinking about now that we understand the streams, the Byzantine and the Alexandrian streams, and that they are different, what's wrong with the Greek New Testaments that we have today? So they primarily rely, what you're saying is they primarily rely on the Alexandrian stream and discount the Byzantine stream. So there's a whole, and that's 90% of the manuscripts that we have from Matthew to Jude. Is that what I hear you saying? Wow. That's unfortunate.
Yes, Kurt and Barbara Allen say very plainly in their introduction to the text that when they have all these Byzantine manuscripts for them, they said they are totally irrelevant for the task of New Testament textual criticism. So they don't use them in their compilation.
Okay.
Now that's Allen. Now today Allen's dead, but that is the mindset that resulted in the UBS text.
Okay. Interesting. So okay.
If you can, the Alexandrian text is pretty well copied, but the scribes weren't infallible. They made mistakes, sometimes really bad ones. All it takes is one scribe making one mistake and not being double checked for the proofreader to then transfer that to the next line.
Mm-hmm.
And the next line can be very sincere and very well disciplined and still never realize the mistake in the previous copy. So you don't have to have a nefarious motive. You simply have to have a scribe who's not doing his job as well as he should.
Right. And
so that's why in ESV, Matthew 12:47 is not in the text because his scribe on go made a mistake and lost his place.
Gotcha. So if we were to end the conversation here, which we're not, of course, someone could walk away and they say, oh my goodness, there's all these variants. Scribes, it almost sounds like the Wild West. The scribes could just make a change. The proofreader didn't catch it. And now that gets passed on to all the lines past that. But this is where the sheer volume of the number of manuscripts that we have really helps keep things in check, because we can look and say, well, these lines over here don't include this. This is this is isolated to this line. So this lets us know that this is a variant and it should be checked by these other ones.
Yes, if we have a diversity of locales, that's better than just having a quantity of manuscripts. The diversity of locales gives you different samples to select. And you can say, it is more likely that one scribe over here made the mistake than that 9 others made the same mistake in the same place.
Gotcha. So if we see the same mistake in an Alexandrian stream, we think, okay, maybe one of Paul's letters went down there, and that line got copied, and then that mistake got copied, and then we check it by maybe a Byzantine or maybe not a Western text, because the Western, from what I understand, and we'll get into those too, weren't necessarily as accurate. But it gives us an idea that, okay, yeah, this shouldn't be in there, and this isn't like. I don't want to make people think that this is just up to a singular textual critic that says, hey, I just don't feel like having this in here. There are rules. This is a science. There are procedures that go along with these things, right?
Yes. There are canons. Canons are guidelines.
They're called canons, you said?
Yes, canons. Not cannons like firing cannonballs, but cannons like CRN.
Gotcha.
But the Byzantine text, it's different from the Alexandrian. It is more harmonized. The scribes of the Byzantine text, we don't know who or where, but sometimes they edited it for people who would read passages in church. And when you read passages in church, you often have people coming in late, and you have people who are new to the text. They want to make sure they understand.
Yeah.
So in the Byzantine text, you sometimes have, and you have this in Alexandrian too, the scribes will make harmonizations. Like if you're reading from Matthew, you might include a detail that is only in Mark. It would be in the text of Matthew. Or for instance, like we've all had preachers preaching, and they cover the text where it says, and he said, and the preacher throws in the words, Jesus said.
Mm-hmm.
So we have the same thing happening in the Byzantine text, where instead of he, it says Jesus. It simply is making the text more explicit. So it has been changed Yes. Has the meaning been changed? No.
See, that's so important, and thank you for bringing that up. So out of all of these variants that are out there, there is some truth that the vast majority of them are really inconsequential to understanding the meaning of the text. He said versus Jesus said it. Sometimes even for us, when we're going through it, like I'm a preacher, when I go through a text, sometimes the antecedent to the pronoun can be a little bit ambiguous. And you think, okay, we don't necessarily know who this is talking about. So a Byzantine editor or scribe might say, okay, instead of, the he here is a little ambiguous. We think this is Jesus. So we're going to go ahead and put Jesus in. But still doesn't really change a lot of the meaning of things. So and I know we didn't discuss this, but out of the numerous variants that are out there, by the way, if you could let us know how many variants there might be, just a ballpark number, how many of the variants are really inconsequential as far as a percentage?
Ballpark number would be 500,000.
500,000 variants. And so that one guy saying there's 138,000 words in the New Testament and there's only 1% that are different, that is not correct.
Well, that's a terrible statistic, because that is like saying, oh, in this book I have this many variants. He's not talking about one book. He's talking about thousands of copies.
So we're talking about across all of the thousands upon thousands of manuscripts that we have, there's about 500,000 variants in all of these different manuscripts against each other.
Yes.
Gotcha.
Any little corruption, even a one-letter corruption between a long and short O, that still is a variant.
Yeah, exactly. Whether it's like an omicron or an omega, okay.
So it can be 12 bits missing, it can be one letter missing. A variant's a variant.
Got it. And what percentage of those actually impact meaning of the text?
I would say about 0.005. That's a rough estimate. That's maybe 3,000. No, 4,000. I'd say would be a rough estimate of how many would impact the text and make a difference in translation.
Okay, so this needs a little bit of explanation, because that's an astoundingly low number. And again, when James says, when you say 4,000, you're not talking about, okay, I open up my Bible and there's 4,000 things in my New Testament that impact meaning. No, you're saying 4,000 among all of the thousands of different manuscripts and minuscules, majuscules, fragments, all papyri, all of these things there. And so if you were to put that down, and I'm sorry to make you do this on the spot. If you don't want to do this on the spot, I get it. If we were to just take a look in someone's New Testament, what kind of a number are we talking about as far as like in someone's New Testament? How many different passages would I need to be concerned in?
I would say if you look at Michael Holmes's SBL Greek Testament, I think he makes note of 4,000. I don't have a number off the top of my head, but about 4,500. The impact of translation. So about that many. Okay,
that's across all the manuscripts.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you see, most of those that 500,000, most of that's spelling.
Yeah.
Yeah. The scribes, there was spelling. There were good spellings, but the scribes did not standardize the spelling in all locales. That's all they had. A standardized dictionary for the whole Roman Empire to use.
So, and again, to really kind of bring this point home, looking at my New Testament, I would really only need to be concerned about 0.005% of anything. And again, one of the big ones that we see, like you said, is in the Gospels. When was Jesus speared? And we happen to have another one that coincides with that. And I mean, that could simply be a scribe putting something in where it didn't belong, or maybe putting it in a verse before it belonged, and maybe it belonged after the very next verse after Jesus died. So it's something significant that we need to take a look at the evidence for. But because of the sheer volume of how God repeats himself. And people always say, why are there three synoptics? Why are Ephesians and Colossians alike? Why does Paul repeat his theology so much? And why does John do the same thing in his books? Why does he have a theme in the gospel and also in his epistle? To me, this is a redundancy that God has put in place to ensure that as he hands this over to fallible human beings, through his foreknowledge and his sovereignty, he passes this on to human beings and says, I'm going to trust you guys to copy this stuff down. You're going to do it pretty accurately, but I'm going to repeat myself several times so that when you invariably make a mistake, people are still going to be able to understand exactly what I need and want them to do. Would you agree with that statement?
Yes. I would say there's a difference between saying, I want every single jot and tittle down to the last little letter to be 100% secure. That's a scientific endeavor.
Sure.
The more practical endeavor is, I want to be able to make sure I have the message in my Bible that was given from the hands of the original authors and producers.
Yes, because again, probably the correct view, and I'd actually like to get into this a little bit. I know I didn't put this on the agenda here for the questions, but when people think of inspiration and inerrancy, I'm really just focusing on inspiration at this particular point, because this is something that I'm going over as this podcast is probably going to come out in November or December of this year after I'm done with the Canon series. But I want to do some things on inspiration and inerrancy as well. Trying to figure out how inspiration worked. And people have a tendency to think that, okay, the autographs were inspired and inerrant, and therefore the copies are inspired and inerrant. And we really need to clarify what that means, because again, the Textus Receptus, I know this would probably, for King James only folks, would be, outside the realm of anything, but the only thing that was inspired and inerrant were the autographs. And the copies that are made they're not inspired and inerrant. God did not inspire a scribe to copy it completely. We know that because there's so many variants. So I think that's something that's really important, but my next question is, is textual criticism where faith goes to die? Because this is what I've seen so many times. People say, I had faith, but then I found out that there were all these variants in the Bible. Bart Ehrman says the exact same thing. I read his books where he says that's what led him down the path of his atheism. It was really the morality of God that put the final nail in the coffin. But he studied under Bruce Metzger, and he said he had this impression that there were no variants, that everything was completely inspired and inerrant all the way down. I don't know if I've ever had that mindset, because I took the original languages in college and I knew that there were variants. I mean, you look at your English Bibles, you can tell that there are variants. So I think we set people up for failure by telling them that, yes, every part of the step and process had inspiration and inerrancy. Would you agree with that?
Well,
or clarify, if you would, your own opinion on that.
Yes. New Testament done right is a ritual study.
I'm sorry, can you say that again? I'm sorry.
I said, New Testament textual criticism done right is simply an analysis of the evidence.
Yes, correct. Yeah, thank you.
And it deepens my appreciation for God's word. And many other textual critics like Peter Urey and Dirk Youngkin would affirm the same thing. But in Ehrman's case, I think he had a level of confidence that wanted to oversimplify things. And when one of his professors said, oh, maybe I'm going to make a mistake, he couldn't handle it. Mm-hmm. And so he began this descent into doubting everything.
Yeah.
He still hasn't come out of that hole yet, but we keep praying for him.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, he's a favorite on this podcast, when we've been going through canon and talking about the authorship of different places. I like to look at his criticisms, and we have video clips of him on, and we take his criticisms and break them down and look to see, are these criticisms accurate? And I think you hit the nail on the head where you say that he oversimplifies things. There's typically a lot of assumptions, and when a scholar makes an assumption, the lay audience looks at that and says, that must be a fact. without getting into too much detail, I think what ends up happening is that people conflate lower criticism with higher criticism, where lower criticism has a little bit more cut and dry, textual criticism being lower criticism. And higher criticism it's all bias. It's all presupposition. It's like, how do we interpret something, which is obviously, full of bias and presupposition. But people in conservatives and progressives do the same thing. They present those conclusions as if this is the only conclusion that can be made, when it's not, and I think being one of the big things that we're big on this podcast is acknowledging our presuppositions, acknowledging our bias, not overstating conclusions. And really the number one question that we always want to ask is, why do we want to believe what we believe? A lot of people say, why do you believe what you believe? I think the next question on that is, why do we want to believe what we believe? And so, hence the question, is this where textual criticism where faith goes to die? And like you said, if it's done right, it strengthens faith, right?
Right. James Harris was a great textual critic in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and he made an important contribution to the field. He was also very active in his faith. He had married a Quaker. He would advocate for the Armenians and the Armenian Holocaust. So, New Testament textual criticism is simply a scientific field that can serve the church if it's done right, and like every other field, hurt the church if it's done wrong. So there's no field that can be judged by how it's been abused, but judged rightly, it is a good thing. It's simply using the evidence we have to affirm the word of God.
Right. And so if someone's faith is shaken, so let's say they've been to a congregation and people misspoke. And they said, see, the Bible in my hand, it's inerrant. And we all believed that there was a straight stream of perfectly done copies from the Apostle Paul or Matthew or Luke all the way down to us. And then they find out that there's not. And their faith is shaken. What should they do?
With a false premise.
Yes.
And in short term, if somebody says, "Oh, I don't believe all these variants. How can I believe anything in the Bible?" Well, a person with shallow faith might fall into doubt. But in the long term, if you dig into the evidence, a better understanding how God has shared his revelation with us will blossom. Your roots will deepen. Like planting a seed in the field in Indiana. The seed goes into the ground, and then it sprouts up.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I would say, plant that doubt in the ground and steady. Don't just let it die in the sun.
Yeah. See, that's great. And that's what we try to do here. And that's what I've tried to encourage people to do. It's our approach to doubt that's really important. I mean, we have to study. We have to be diligent. We have to put in the effort to do it. We can't let somebody else think for us. We need to think for ourselves. And really, a lot of times it comes down to, again, why do people want to believe what they want to believe? And people just have a tendency, I find, to use almost like a technicality. Like I've been in ministry 33 years, I believe. I see a lot of times people use a technicality as a reason to just go ahead and do what they wanted to do anyway. You've been doing ministry for a while. You've probably seen the same thing.
Yes, I think it was Ambrose Bierce who said, the person who wants to find an excuse to not believe something, if he doesn't find one, he'll make something up.
Exactly. Now, speaking of this, is there, like I said, I'm going to put the link to your book in the description because I think it's fantastic. Are there any other books that you would recommend for a layperson to look at this, or maybe any debates where people could watch online? That would be great. And if you can't think of anything off the top of your head, that's great. We can put it in the show notes afterwards.
Well, I have read some King James Earliest about specific passages, especially 1 John 5:7, where you have the come your ham. That's a little phrase that's there that's not found in the vast majority of manuscripts is still not there. But so if you go on YouTube and search for my name, James Snapp Jr., two B's in Snap, and see what popped up.
That's great. Yeah, I actually, I figured we'd be talking about, and again, I don't know how to pronounce it. I've heard it Johannine, Johannine, Johannine. So tomato, the Johannine.
The phrase in the gospel, the phrase in First John.
Yeah, the phrase in First John. So for those of you who don't necessarily use King James or something on the Byzantine stream, it says, for there are three that bear witness, for there are three that bear record in heaven, the Father, the Word, and the Holy Ghost, and these three are one. That's called the Johannine comma. It's missing from the Alexandrian stream. Like my New American Standard, I've only pretty much ever used New American Standard because, side note, I didn't always do my homework in college. And when I was in Hebrew class, sometimes we needed to translate, and sometimes I would read out of the New American Standard, the older version. And my professor, Doc Smith, would say, Mr. Hartford, that's a really good translation. I said, yes, sir. You can thank the Lockman Foundation for that. I would never take credit for it, but it was just a very literal. It was a very literal text, so I just always used that one. So I wasn't even necessarily familiar with the Johannine comma too much, but that's what that says. And so that's a significant piece, but it's not something that we don't find in other places of the New or even Old Testament.
Yeah, and those who don't believe in the Trinity, the Unitarians, they'll say, "Oh, your Bible's been changed. The Trinity's been added in there." But the people who gave us the doctrine of the Trinity of the Godhead, guys like Athanasius and other people in the 1800s, their Bibles didn't have the comma you hang on. It was only in Africa where they were in Latin. In their Latin copies, that's where it was in use. It didn't come from John.
Gotcha. So next question. How many? So we talked about the Alexandrian and the Byzantine stream. How many textual streams are there actually, and how accurate are they? Because I really love the answer you gave me. Because, like you mentioned, it really depends on what part of the New Testament we're talking about. Certain parts of the New Testament have different streams are better for accuracy. So can you dive into that for us?
Yes, as usual. We must define terms and avoid oversimplification.
Yes.
So you often see these two lines compared side by side. Alexandrian bad, Antiochian good. Antiochian means Byzantine. It's basically the same thing. But the textual streams should be approached in terms of genres. It should be oversimplified into two lines for the whole New Testament. It means to divide the books into genres: Gospels, Acts, Epistles. That means general epistles, the Pauline epistles, and then Revelation, which is a whole different model. For the Gospels, there are two streams. You have the Alexandrian, the Byzantine, but also a cluster of manuscripts called the Caesarean text, Family 1, and also the Western text, which is not very popular today, but in the early church, it was pretty popular. And the Caesarean text, briefly dominated at the city of Caesarea. That's where a guy named Eusebius worked in the early 300s, and that's also where a church father named Origen had settled down in the 200s after leaving Alexandria.
Mm-hmm.
The Western line exists in Greek, mainly in one manuscript, Codex Bezae, and in Latin versions in Numidia, Spain, France, and Italy.
Got it.
And the epistles, the version is less drastic, and so it's easier to maintain a simple Alexandrian or Byzantine framework. But when you get to the general epistles, you also have a cluster of manuscripts called the Hartland group, which is especially valuable, which echoes, even though the manuscripts are late, there's a way to determine that these late manuscripts are echoing earlier master copies that go back before the 300s.
Gotcha. So it really is going to depend on, and I think the way that you mentioned it is, the Gospels, you said Byzantine is really going to be where you want to be on those, right?
And yes, except for orthography, I would go with Alexandrian orthography would really have an impact. Sometimes the letter O and the Omicron and the Omega, those that mix up a lot.
So what do you mean by orthography for our viewers? What does that mean? Spelling. Got it. Okay.
So in Revelation, you have a holding model, like I said. Revelation is not in part of the Byzantine lectionary, and so it's easy to misunderstand the book. And so it's usually very often it was copied with a commentary along with it. So it's like for John, the Gospel of John, we have over 1,700 manuscripts. For Revelation, we have fewer than 400. So we're not dealing with the same quantities.
Got it. And so you also talked about there were some other ones that stand out for Revelation. I think you mentioned Alexandrinus was a really good one for Revelation.
Yes. I would say most Alexandrian is so good that you could get away with just going through Alexandrian and translating from that one manuscript using no more than 6 others to clarify where the scribe made mistakes, and you would be just fine.
Wow, that's interesting. So, in what we're seeing here is like you mentioned, 1,700 manuscripts of the Gospel of John, 400 manuscripts of Revelation, which is still a lot. I mean, that's a significant witness to these things.
Well, I honestly, I said fewer than 400.
Oh, fewer than 400. Okay.
So.
Okay, yeah. Accuracy is important. Absolutely. And so compare that to, we mentioned Plato, we mentioned Homer earlier. What's the manuscript evidence for these? And like you said, no one doubts that these contain the general words of these folks. What's the manuscript evidence for these writings of antiquity?
Well, I think that the guys like Joshua Yao and Dan Wallace have done the math and said, for New Testament we have a stack higher than the Empire State Building, whereas for Homer and Plato we have a stack that you can put on a desk.
Okay, that's significant. And the sheer volume, again, to repeat something that we talked about earlier, the sheer volume of the number of manuscripts we have really does help us weed out the non-original readings. Like I said, these overzealous scribes, these overzealous editors, we're able to, with a high degree of confidence, would you say, be able to weed out their editorial comments and get back to the original?
Well, again, I wouldn't put the focus on quantity, but on the quantity of manuscripts, but on the quantity of locales, of our branches.
Mm-hmm.
It's like if you had a tree and one branch, and somebody had grafted a branch onto it. But looking at multiple branches, you could say, okay, all these branches, you have 10 giving us apples, and one over here giving us oranges. So was this originally the trunk, an orange tree or an apple tree?
Mm-hmm. Right.
So having a divergence of locales is more important than having quantities of manuscript.
Yeah, that's
one branch can have whole lot of fruit, but if they all go back to the same branch, all of those twigs, the numbers aren't really as important.
Gotcha. So actually people have a tendency to think, oh man, these streams actually make it more difficult because, now we've got to worry about these different locales and all these types of things. But what you're saying is that having the variance in different streams and having the manuscripts divided between these different streams and locales is actually a huge strength for us.
Yes, because as I was before, it is more probable intrinsically to have one scribe and one locale make a mistake and have the same mistake being made by multiple scribes at the very same point in the text.
Gotcha. And so
that's what reading out means. Yes.
Got it. Well, that's great. So again, trying to break this down so people can walk away with some actionable information when it comes to, hey, can I trust this thing? Now, what what language and stream, and I know we've talked about this a little bit already, but what languages and streams are the most accurate? And I know that, we've got some things that are in Latin, we have some things that are in Coptic, we have things that are in Greek. What do we put the most weight on?
Well, everything is stratified. But I mean, there was some early Latin, Coptic, and Syriac versions of the Gospels in the 200s. People didn't stop making new versions of the Gospels in Latin and Coptic and Syriac just because one person had made a version already. By the middle of the 400s, there were versions in Gothic, Armenian, and Ethiopic too. But the basis, unless you have a version being based on another version, the basis is the Greek. That's what the authors wrote in, and that's what the conversations are made from.
Got it. So when you say Coptic, that's down in Egypt. And when you say Syriac, what do you mean by Syriac? Is that Aramaic? Is that, what is Syriac?
Syriac is Syriac. You could probably say Aramaic, and it'd be the same letter forms. Got it.
And, the one that I'm familiar with, and again, forgive my pronunciation, is it the Peshitta? Is the Syriac copy, and that's mainly the Gospels, right? And what do you think of that as far as its accuracy in the Gospels? And again, that would be written not in Greek, but in Aramaic or Syriac.
Yeah. Well, the Peshitta isn't a copy; it is a version.
A version. Okay, got it.
It is written in Syriac.
Got it. And so, how accurate is that? Do you think? Do you think that's a good? Because I know you. I think you view that pretty highly, don't you?
Yes. As usual in textual, you also have to say everything with prefacing it with some exception.
Yeah, exactly.
That phrase comes up over and over again. This assumes almost everything you say with some exception. There's always going to be some freak outlier or some anomaly that will say, "Oh, what is this?" And say, "Well, yeah, this is an exception."
Got it.
So the earliest layer of this Hittite version is very Alexandrian. It agrees with the text of Vaticanus very often. If you look at Acts 27, when Vaticanus says there were 200 and it says that there were about 76 people on board the ship, where the Byzantine text says there are 276. Because Vaticanus, the scribe, the text has this error in it. It has the wrong number. And the Synodic version has the same number as Vaticanus. So you can see that's Vaticanus and the Synodic version, they have these reasons in common, which means they descend from the same earlier source.
Got it. And side question, Papias, who Eusebius quotes, states that Matthew was written in Aramaic first, although there's no copies of Matthew in Aramaic. But I tend to value the history of the patristic, especially when you get so close to source. Do you think? I'm just curious what your thoughts are. Do you think Matthew was written in Hebrew/Aramaic?
Well, I think that Matthew, when he's writing his gospel, he's using his notes that he wrote down, but he was taking notes from Jesus' sermons. So he has these sayings, or it's called the Logia source, that is certainly in Aramaic. That's what Jesus would typically speak in.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. It's my thought too.
So
I thought this
one of my sources was his, and so notes he taken.
Got it.
So, and if you look at the Gospel of Matthew, you can see those discourses, 5 of them, which kind of makes Matthew's Gospel source material like the 5 books of Moses. You have this new law being made.
Exactly. Yeah, we talked about that when we talked about our canon and the earlier episodes. The 5 messages correlating to the 5 books. That's interesting. Yeah. So you mentioned that the Latin in the notes that you gave me, that the Old Latin is the least accurate version. Would someone like me who doesn't understand all of the different streams here and versions and all that type of thing, I look at the Old Latin and I say, is that the Vulgate? Is that what Jerome wrote? And I know there were versions before Jerome, but would you consider that the Latin Vulgate?
No. Jerome's Vulgate, by the time of the late 300s, there were so many Latin versions that people began to complain that saying, hey, our Bible don't all say the same thing in Latin. So the Pope, the Bishop of Rome in Damascus, he commissioned the scholar Jerome to say, Jerome, would you mind clarifying the Latin text for us and sorting out this stuff? And Jerome said, well, yes, I'll do that. So in his preface to the Gospels, the Vulgate Gospels, he said, here in Damascus is my new version of the Gospels in Latin. I've used ancient Greek manuscripts when I consulted them. I didn't want to change from the old Latin too much, but I did want to give you what was handed down in Greek. So this Latin text that I'm giving you is based on old manuscripts that I had access to that were in Greek.
Got it.
So Jerome wrote the Vulgate, claiming that it was intended to replace the old Latin.
Got it. No, that makes sense. Makes sense. Now, next question I have is why were the textual streams adjusted, changed, and when did that begin? I think you're probably going to be getting into the concept of lectionaries at this particular point, because you mentioned people came in late to the church services, and so it's just interesting to know that people are people, and it's the same thing, almost 2,000 years ago that happens today. So I just find that interesting.
Almost as soon as the books of the Bible we copied and circulated in the churches, some scribes adjusted the text to the needs of the congregation. Just like they wouldn't read the whole Gospel of Matthew in one setting. They would read part of it, and then somebody would preach. Just Martin mentions he's in the first half of the 100 that he's mentioning. We're already doing this then. So this happened very early on. And chapter summaries in Latin go back to at least the 200s, where they were not only organizing the text into chapters, but also having little notes before each part began, say, this is a chapter about when this happened, and this is a chapter when this happened. So it all happened very early on. As far as why and what kind of changes were made, now for some variants you have to say, I had no idea why this scribe did this, because sometimes it's just weird.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes the scribe would skip something, he probably was just sleepy. But also some place where just a lack of spelling.
Mm-hmm.
But also some cases where there is a deliberate alteration to the text. And in those places where you can tell, okay, this is not an accident, this happened for a reason. The main motive that I deduce from a large sample is there was a desire to make the text meaning more obvious to the people who were hearing the text read to them. So if you picture a congregation that cannot read, and they're relying on the lecturer, the first reading, to speak the text clearly, he is going to give them the text as clear as possible. In the Western text, you have in Latin a very embellished text where extra effort has been made to make sure, sort of like some preachers do when you have the old saying, don't preach till you be understood. Preach you cannot be preach in such a way that you cannot be misunderstood.
Mm-hmm.
That is kind of the Western approach to make sure that people would understand the reading. That ultimately they would harmonize. They would throw in proper names. Whether it's just supposed to be a pronoun. So the text went from being less explicit to being more explicit because of this.
Got it. And that actually makes sense because, if they're wanting to make it, again, I think sometimes we take things for advantage now. I mean, when I want to do something like that, I sit down at my computer, I type it out, I print it off on my printer, and I have everything that I need. They didn't have that ability back in those days, so they would actually spend the time, energy, and resources because, again, this required funding to hire someone to do these types of things. And they would create a version of the Bible that would be necessary and useful for them. I mean, we've got all different kinds of versions today that cater to specific doctrinal presuppositions or specific format. Okay, read your Bible through in a year. I mean, one of the ones I love are the Harmony of the Gospels. Love those things. I love reading them. It makes a lot of sense for me to see how they lay out. The Harmony of the Gospels would be like a lectionary, wouldn't it?
If it is divided into segments, yes.
Yeah.
This is the reading for today.
Yeah. Okay. That's really interesting. So, and again, because these were so personal, what we actually have is the ability to determine when they were edited, how they were edited, possibly even by whom they were edited, and to say, okay, this was added, this was not part of the original reading, especially since they're divided up into different, like you said, readings of the week or readings of the day or whatever the case may be.
Yeah. Yes. When we have some issues that say, at the beginning of a certain section, they often introduce it with a certain phrase called an incipit. And sometimes the scribe copying a lectionary would also be copying a gospel. And sometimes when he was copying the gospel, he would include this phrase that was taken from the lectionary. That it wasn't to introduce a doctrinal change, just to make the text easier to understand.
Got it. And
so in Luke, for instance, in I think it's Luke 7:31, you have this phrase, and the Lord said, which is not in most manuscripts, but it was in some. That's taken from the lectionary.
Got it.
So does it make a doctrinal difference? No. Does it make a difference? Well, yes.
Yeah. And again, to emphasize again, I think this is so important, and this is like, if nothing else that we were able to accomplish by having you on, it's this, is that yes, there's a lot of variance, 500,000 potentially among all the different manuscripts, 0.005, the numbers that we really have to be concerned about. And of that, we have a lot of redundancy so that the Lord is able to help us to understand exactly what we're looking at. So with all of these different versions and changes that were made, and specifically the approach of scholars in creating a usable and the most accurate Greek New Testament that we can create. What is your approach that you use? And because I like, first of all, I think it's a cool title, Equitable Eclecticism. I love that title. And basically it's let's not be so caught up in the Alexandrian stream, but let's go ahead and give everything the weight it deserves, and let's not leave anything out that we might not want to leave out.
Yeah. My approach, eclecticism, is different from what some folks like to call reason eclecticism, because the result of reason eclecticism is a text that is 99.99% Alexandrian.
So you said reasonable or reasoned eclecticism?
Yes.
Okay, that's the other version.
It Wallace uses, but in terms of its results, you have a text that is the basis. It is over 99% Alexandrian, where they differ.
Why do people want to do that? So I'm just curious. This seems to me, it's like taking a look at science and looking at someone who is a paleobiologist or something along those lines, and they say we're only going to look at naturalistic causes. We're not going to even entertain anything supernatural because we have a naturalistic bias, and real science is done on a naturalistic basis. It's something we push back on a lot. Why would somebody say, I only want to utilize the Alexandrian stream? Because again, the question is, why do we want to believe what we want to believe? Why do we do the things that we do? There's a reason why for that. So first, maybe you could answer that in two ways. Number one, what reason would they say they would do that approach versus what your thoughts are maybe as to why that approach is so prevalent?
Yeah, it works at two levels. So let's take the first level at a time. First, what they would say? They would say, on the scientific level, among scholars who still advocate the Alexandrian text, they would say, well, we all know the Byzantine text should be ignored because it didn't exist before somebody in the 200s put it together. Before that, you only had the Alexandrian and the Western.
The Lucian recension.
Yes, that's what Hort said, and that's what dated until the 1940s. Yeah,
so for our folks, the Lucian recension it's fictitious, right? It's a concept that's made up, that's taught as fact, kind of like JEPD or JDP and all these other types of things. But what it states is that someone, Lucian of Antioch, was it, or where is he from?
Well, Lucian of Antioch is just a name that's throughout there. There's no
Okay.
evidence
That he exists.
that would nail it down.
Okay.
But is the assumption that somebody, if not Lucian, then Lucian's babysitter or something, but the Lucian physician, that theory is assumed. That was assumed by Hort, and by the time that it was realized, this is no longer tenable because of the evidence we have now from the papyri. By the time that they realized we had to back up, the model was already locked into academia and is still being erased.
Got it. So they just state that basically Lucian created this Byzantine stream, and so therefore it needs to be completely removed. So a critic or a proponent of Alexandrian priority, saying we only need to use these. Let's only use Vaticanus and Sinaiticus as they're the benchmarks, is because this other version was created and therefore can't be trusted. What's the problem with that concept?
Well, there are multiple problems. So we have, but the main problem is Hort, in his case for preferring the Alexandrian text, he said, well, we have this thing called conflations in the Byzantine text that you don't see in the Alexandrian. So he would say, if you have a conflation, you have to have something to conflate. So in the Byzantine text, you have readings where the Alexandrian and Western are both shorter, and the Byzantine text looks like you have taken the reading from the Alexandrian and from the Western and simply put the two together, which would be what you have when you have a restriction. But after Hort, when they had the 1894 Oxford debate, it was realized Hort had placed, well, there was a knowledge that too much weight had been placed on a very small number of conflations, because in the Alexandrian you also have conflations. You have Colossians 1:12 in Vaticanus. You have also in Jude 3 in Sinaiticus. You have these conflations in them too. So the conflations are not decisive. So really, what should have happened is, after the papyri were analyzed, we should have said, hey, time out, let's rewind, let's back up, go back to the text made by Schultz back in the 1830s, and start over. But instead, because the way the marketplace works, the Bibles that were printed by the British Foreign Bible Society, those prevailed as the base text, and later on, when you have American scholars, and really international too, but Americans were many of the driving forces. When you have the NIV coming along, and then also the New England Standard beside it, you have these market forces that are basically answer your questions for you, and the scholars don't get a chance to say, okay, either I don't care because I have tenure, I just don't want to go through the trouble of saying we need to back up and get off this addiction to the Alexandrian text. It's natural when somebody makes a big discovery to say, oh, I made a discovery, it must be really important. When Tisdorf had his big discovery of Sinaiticus, he was already a great scholar, already well known. He already made his mark. He already had compiled a Greek New Testament. When he had discovered Sinaiticus, we went back and changed his compilation in over 3,000 places. So people who are close to discoveries often say, oh, I think it's important. But so often when people back up and get a chance to let time go by and new discoveries come into play, realize it's not really as important as they thought it was.
See, you just brought up something that's incredibly important, I think. So Constantine Tischendorf found Sinaiticus. He discovered it. And then you said he went back. He had already created a Greek New Testament and then went back and changed it in 3,000 places where Sinaiticus disagreed with where, he was at. So because he was so close, and like you said, that happens where people discover something, they know it's big. I mean, you would state Sinaiticus discovery was big discovery. Of course, but it needs to be weighed properly. It needs to be put in its proper perspective. And so sometimes people, when they get too close to a discovery, they find a way to inflate it because they discovered it. That's really kind of the bottom line.
I think it's a phenomenon that is called discovery fear.
Yeah.
And we still have today this fixation on these two manuscripts, and that has affected many versions, like the ESV, the NLT, the New Revised Version. But there's one exception called that I have here, the Evangelical Heritage Version. They have realized we shouldn't be so focused on the Alexandrian manuscripts that we ignore the voice to which God has spoken to his people in the Byzantine text for generations. Many people who subscribe to what's called the Westminster Confession, they say that in the outset, we believe that God's word has been preserved pure in every age. Well, the Alexandrian text was lost, basically, in Greek, essentially in the Middle Ages. So, and the Byzantine text spread into Egypt. So, if you're going to have that as your premise, the Westminster Confession, then I would say they would accept the Byzantine text by default, because that is the text that you would say, well, we have these ages, the Apostolic Age, the Middle Ages, and today, where you have the Byzantine text being used to convey God's truth to his church.
Got it. So with the emphasis on the Alexandrian and the lifting up of Sinaiticus, especially, so high, and the dependence on it, you actually see with some folks today the pendulum shifting even the other direction. And I know we chatted about this, where some people even view Sinaiticus as a forgery and that it shouldn't be trusted at all.
Yes, David Daniels, and that's a guy who's involved with distractions. A very, very kind, mild-mannered guy, but his ideas about Sinaiticus are positively wacko.
Okay. Tell me how you really feel. Just kidding. Yeah, so they're kind of out there, you say. I haven't read them. I have friends that have, so I was just curious about your thoughts on that.
Yeah, wacko, and wacko.
Okay.
But I have on my blog going into detail with quite a bit of effort to say, here is why this makes no sense.
Gotcha. But I mean, when we put something up into a place where maybe it necessarily shouldn't go, you do get reactions to that. You do get things that swing back the other direction, and maybe sometimes they swing back way too far.
Well, yes. When you have somebody who says, "Oh, my Bible is absolutely right in every detail,"
mm-hmm.
and they realize, well, it's scribe here, it says Jesus when it should have said he. And they're like, oh, no. And they clutch his pearls and they have what's called the Mumpsimus mentality. And Erasmus back in the 1500s had to deal with the same thing. He said, once upon a time, there was a priest who would give the Mass in Latin. And every time he gave, she said the word Mumpsimus. Well, Mumpsimus isn't a real word. It should be substance. And one day, the bishop came by, and after the service was over, he said, you're saying it wrong. You said Mumpsimus, where you should say Subsimus in Latin. And the priest said, oh, you keep your newfangled Subsimus. I like my old-fashioned Mumpsimus. So the question became not what was it supposed to be, what was the original text, but what am I used to?
Yeah.
And so often we get used to, oh, I want what my grandma's Bible said. I want what my preacher's Bible said. We shouldn't want what the authors and producers of the New Testament wrote.
Yeah, it's funny. I've heard people way back when, used to say, talking about the King James, saying, I want the Bible that Paul carried. And I said, well, actually, you probably should use the Septuagint then, because that's the Bible that Paul, probably being a Hellenistic Jew, that's the one he probably would have used. Yeah. So the Greek New Testament today, obviously, like you said, really dependent upon the Alexandrian stream. And you would have us put more emphasis on the Byzantine. Are there more people that are coming around to that, or are the powers that be and the forces that are out there that are still putting this out? Like you said, there's a lot of market forces. Of course, there's market forces in everything. They're still primarily Alexandrian, but are things beginning to change? Is there any momentum into creating probably a more accurate Greek New Testament, or has somebody already done that?
Well, Robinson and Pierpont have had ever since the 2005. They've had their Byzantine text, which is out there, is available online for free. Also, the Hodges and Farstad have their majority text, which is very similar to Robinson and Pierpont, and that is also available. Anybody can download it for free. Now, have there been English translations that are very popular that have been based on those? No. Have there been some? Yes. I have them listed on my blog. Just recently I had a blog about what versions are based on the Byzantine texts that are out there today. The Orthodox Church has recently released an English translation that is based on the Byzantine text.
Interesting. Have you heard of one of the ones I like to use a little bit? Is something called the Modern Literal Version. Have you heard of that? Have you seen that?
Yep, I have one here.
Okay, great. What do you think about that one? I mean, it's very choppy, but I like it.
Yeah, it is very choppy. I think it's too choppy to ever have widespread popularity like the New King James, but it's okay.
Got it.
I would recommend that above the NIV.
Yeah, exactly. Especially the newer versions that are coming out, because I tell you that the newer versions are. I don't know what your thoughts are, but they're succumbing, I think, to a lot of the ideology that's popular today with the changes that get made in some of these newer versions.
Well, just in the change between the NIV, there is a compromise.
Mm-hmm.
The NIV in 84 was a big school of scholarship. That was over 105 scholars all working together. But in the 2011, a small group of scholars, like 15 people, a committee, they introduced new changes, including changing things in the same way that the TNIV had been changed, where there is this although I know they deny it, they say, oh, we egalitarian, we're complementarian. Although that might fly with some people, I do not buy it. I simply don't believe him.
Gotcha. So, hey, I actually want to get into, for our last little bit of time together here, I'd actually like to get into some specific texts and questions. And these are some of the ones that I mentioned to you. One of the ones that I always thought was interesting, and again, because I like looking for bias that might be coming in, in Jude 5, where it talks about how the Lord led them out of Egypt, where it looks like some of the manuscript evidence is Jesus led them out of Egypt. I found the quote of Metzger, what he stated about why the editorial board went with Lord instead of Jesus. He wrote, critical principles seem to require the adoption of Jesus, which admittedly is the best attested reading among Greek and versional witnesses. He said, see above. I don't have the evidence. He said, struck by the strange and unparalleled mention of Jesus in a statement about the redemption out of Egypt, copyists would have substituted kurios, ha kurios or ha theos. So he basically stated that seeing Jesus in the Old Testament, that's weird. So the copyist looks at this and says, oh, we're going to go ahead and put kurios or theos or theos instead of Jesus, instead of Jesus. So we're going to put Lord and God instead of the name of Jesus. So and corresponding to that, you've got 1 Corinthians 10, where it says, let them not test the Lord, where there's manuscript evidence that states, let them not test Christ. So, what are your thoughts on those? And it just seems, if I take that statement at face value, if that's accurate, Metzger's saying, yeah, there's manuscript evidence for the contrary, and that's probably what it should have been. But the board didn't like the concept of seeing Jesus in the Old Testament, which is a naturalistic type of a bias. So we're going to go ahead and just translate that Lord instead, which would bother me. And I don't care what necessarily preaches better. What I care about is them being accurate to the evidence, regardless of where that evidence leads, whether, and I don't appreciate a naturalistic bias from the editors of the New Testament. I don't think it belongs there. Let's go back to let's go back to the text and find what did it really say?
Yeah. Tommy Wasserman, who's a Scandinavian scholar, he has studied the book of Jude. I think he has seen more manuscripts of Jude than anybody else on the planet. And when he came to verse 5, he in his compilation adopted the word Jesus. Serves that. He adopted the word Lord. Very bad.
And you said that's Tommy Wasserman? Okay. And so he thinks that the evidence is there. Have you looked at the evidence? Have you seen that? So when he says, obviously seems like he's probably leaning more on the Alexandrian manuscripts, right? So any instance on what the Byzantine stream, does that put emphasis on Lord instead of Jesus?
Yes, the Byzantine stream reads Lord with the curios there.
Okay, got it. So,
so I think you can go with one of the guidelines that I've introduced is prefer a less specific reading.
Gotcha. And why does that make sense?
Because the two reasons. One is that when people read in the Bible the word Lord, they think, well, okay, is talking about the Father or the Son or the Spirit? They're all the Lord, they're all Yahweh. But is this Jesus the Son or is it the Father? And having the pre-incarnate Jesus be there being tested, that is a concept that some people might object to. At the same time, scribes, by having their heads, they fear him saying, "Thou shalt tempt the Lord your God," and so the word "Lord" would be in the heads already. It'd be very easy for a scribe to just think he's writing down from his head what was in the master copy, where he got them the switches crossed in his head.
Gotcha. So that actually brings up the question that I was wanting to talk about with inspiration. Obviously, the scripture brings out the point that no interpretation of prophecy is made by, or no prophecy is made by anyone's interpretation in 2 Peter chapter 1, but men moved by the Holy Spirit. So it seems really obvious that God, especially when you look at the prophecies in the Old Testament and the fulfillments of these things, no human being could have done that. That seems to be, in my mind, the mark of divine inspiration upon the text. It does something, and I've studied a lot of these other texts. I've studied the Quran in detail. I studied with an imam for months, and no other book has anything like what the Bible does as far as these types of evidences and proofs, in my opinion. But what I see a lot of times is God definitely kept the personality and the abilities of the writers in check, because you look at Mark's Greek, it's very different from Luke's. It's different from John's. I mean, Luke's Greek and again, I'm not a Greek expert by any stretch, but his Greek is pretty exquisite. And even, Ehrman even states it, another critic state, oh man, Luke's, especially the prologue. I mean, it's phenomenal. So my question is, how do you think inspiration possibly worked in this? I know it's a little bit outside the realm of textual criticism, but it impacts what goes on the page, with God keeping everything intact with the person, their personality coming through. How did he ensure that what was being written down was what he wanted to be written down? And I know this is probably an opinion because we don't have a "thus saith the Lord" on this is how I did it. It's not automatic writing where he took control of their hands, so how did it happen?
Well, God is in the equation, so there's always going to be an element of mystery. But basically, God takes a ordinary human being, guided by his spirit, and causes that person to write exactly what he wants them to write. And Also, to produce for the church exactly what he wanted to produce. How he, what level he influences the will? Well, it's clearly not a matter of turning the author into an automaton. And there are also the contributions from the scribes or redactors. You have at the end of Deuteronomy, somebody else coming along to write the conclusion of the book after President Moses has died.
Yeah, because Moses isn't writing about his own death and burial, that's for sure. Yeah.
Joshua, likewise.
Mm-hmm.
You have somebody else coming along with Solomon.
Mm-hmm.
Ezra, when we get to Ezra, he's receiving what has come before him and is standardizing everything. So Ezra is probably updating the language a bit, putting things into the Hebrew that was used in his day.
Mm-hmm.
So just like a person who is reading Shakespeare today and wants his people to understand it would clarify a lot, we need to clarify a lot for our congregations.
Exactly. Well, I appreciate that. Just a personal question. When you're not reading the New Testament in Greek, what English version do you read that you consider the most accurate?
Well, I have right here my EOB New Testament. I use that for purposes of devotional reading. Also, sometimes when I have glasses, I subscribe whatever has the Living Script.
I'm at that age too. I
also like this one, the Evangelical Heritage Reading. The Lutherans put this out, and it is very good.
Evangelical Heritage version?
Yes.
Okay, and so it's pretty accurate too?
Yes.
Okay.
I like it far better than the NIV and New American Standard.
Got it. So when someone comes across, and again, we're going to be wrapping up here in bringing some threads that are still maybe out there that haven't been brought to too fine of a close yet to wrap these up. When someone is reading their New Testament and they see a passage in brackets and it says, or they see a footnote and it says the oldest manuscripts do not include this. Most people think, okay, then maybe I probably shouldn't pay that much attention to it. What does it actually mean when we see that footnote in, say, the New American Standard or another version? What does it mean when it says that, and how much weight should we put on that?
I want to make this perfectly clear. Most footnotes in the IV and in the ESV are a train wreck.
That's interesting. Yeah, please explain that a little bit more for us, because I think I'm going to like where this is going.
When you see the oldest manuscripts, you have to ask, why are they the oldest? Our oldest manuscripts, for the early church, they were written on papyrus. Papyrus naturally wears out if it gets wet, if it's in moisture. Natural humidity will destroy papyrus in a matter of centuries. So we don't have papyrus from Europe or Asia Minor or anywhere except Egypt, because in Egypt, uniquely, they are very dry, low humidity conditions. So anytime you're appealing to the oldest manuscripts, if they're papyri, they're from Egypt. So you simply say we appeal to the oldest papyri manuscripts. Thus, you have no more authority than saying we appeal to the manuscripts that are the driest.
So that's really interesting. So we're appealing to the driest manuscripts, or the most arid regions manuscript. And you said that the concept of the truthfulness and the authenticity of the text comes from the fact that we have a majority of locales. And what you're saying is, when we look at the oldest manuscripts, we've got one locale, and that's it. So this is an echo chamber of a manuscript.
Yes, we shouldn't have to consider just the locale manuscripts. We should look at also the church evidence from the church fathers, because they go back older than the oldest manuscripts. We have writings from Irenaeus and Justin Martyr. They're quoting their manuscripts far more earlier than the earliest manuscripts.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we're talking mid-second century, especially for someone like Justin Martyr. And we've got, we still have, and I'm not sure when the earliest writings on someone like Ignatius or Polycarp, but we've got quotes from them as well that we can take a look at. So absolutely.
So there's not only the evidence for manuscripts, but also, like I said before, versions, but also the patristic evidence has been enormously important. Now, I like the EOB because they, in their history, the Orthodox Church has always taken the patristic testimony into consideration. And that's why the Byzantine text handed down has always been assumed to be a faithful record of the message given to the church.
Interesting. So that brings up another question. So the patristic evidence of quotations of scripture before Vaticanus and Sinaiticus, are they Alexandrian or are they Byzantine?
They're a mix.
Interesting.
They are some are heavily Alexandrian, some are heavily Western, and some are a bit of each. So it's not like they only had one stream in one place. Some places are, for instance, in the Gospel of Mark, in Mark 1:2, the reading in the prophets and the reading in Isaiah, those things have both been known to Irenaeus, even as early as the 180s.
Okay, interesting. And does it depend upon where they're from? I mean, obviously Irenaeus is in Lyon, but do the Alexandrian early church writers, are they quoting mainly from the Alexandrian sources, and the ones more in the Turkey, Syria region, are they quoting mainly from Byzantine? Or does it not depend upon where they are as far as locality?
Well, the ones they see, some Persian writers moved around. For instance, Irenaeus, born in Asia Minor, then moved west, also visited Rome. So you would think that if he had visited Rome and saw how the church copies there, he would know, because he early enough that the church of Rome would have the record of the Gospel of Mark.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So when Irenaeus quotes from Mark 16:19, that carries a whole lot more weight than having two manuscripts from the 300s that don't have it.
See, and that's huge, because the end of Mark 16 is viewed as not in the original, right? Because, the oldest manuscripts don't include that, but you have Irenaeus who would have had access to that before, and this predates Sinaiticus and Vaticanus, and he quotes it. Yes. So yep. That's
Irenaeus
big.
is using a copy that is within a century of Mark writing the gospel.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. That's great. And so this brings up, as we're, like I said, I keep saying we're wrapping up, and we are, but I'd love talking to you. So I always come up with more questions, but I want to be respectful of your time. For most people, textual criticism really does boil down to what expert you're going to listen to. And so it seems like maybe we should follow your approach of equitable eclecticism when it comes to the sources that we read, and maybe not just focus on one source, especially if that source might be ultra biased and dismissive of evidence that is contrary to their viewpoint. I think all the evidence should be dropped in and looked at and weighted properly. But I don't see that with a lot of scholars, which is why I appreciate you, because you're like unvarnished, man. You're just out there talking about this evidence, and I see what you write, and I compare it to what other people write, and I think, well, here's a guy that's looking at everything, and he doesn't really care where the conclusions lead him, as long as it's based upon all the evidence. So, but it's kind of, it really just depends upon who you listen to, and if you blow everybody else out and don't listen to them, you're going to be guaranteed to come to the same conclusion that person's coming to.
Well, yeah, I think if I say something and I think the King only hate me and the liberals hate me, I say, well, I must get it right.
Right. There you go. It's and that's kind of where I'm at. I mean, even theologically, I'm probably, I'm definitely different than a lot of folks. And, like I said, we both come from the same heritage, and, I'm definitely very, very, very conservative theologically, very conservative theologically. But that has come from a lot of me just questioning everything. I went through a little bit of a crisis of faith when I graduated from Bible college, because I moved, a couple thousand miles away, and I held my Bible college professors up on pedestals because they were the smartest guys I've ever met. And when I was in the colleges, or when I was in the churches down in Florida, and I would say, so-and-so said this, they would be like, oh yeah, well, if so-and-so said that, then that's got it. You moved 2,000 miles away and they've never heard of him, and you say, so-and-so says this. They're like, who? So now you actually have to defend based upon evidence. And I'm not saying that was my Bible college professor's fault. That's my fault for doing that. And so I had to essentially deconstruct almost everything that I believed and actually build it back up from the bottom up. And I just have a natural distrust and of someone saying scholars say, scholars say, scholars say. I'll you have like famous scholars who quote Ehrman or other critics like him and say, well, this is the way it is because so-and-so said so. And it's like, well, no, let's go back into Ehrman's evidence. And he says, okay, Paul didn't write Ephesians because in Ephesians, we've got, 15 sentences that are longer than 50 words in the Greek. And in Galatians, we only have one. But his evidence is based upon where do we put the punctuation, because there's no punctuation in the original. And so when you actually go in and look and say, okay, well, where's the punctuation supposed to be? It depends on what Greek New Testament you're utilizing. So his evidence is completely garbage, as far as what he's talking about. So long rant, sorry, sometimes I get on a soapbox, but I just appreciate the concept that you're bringing out. And I think we need to make sure that we don't pretend that where we're coming from is objective when we're only listening to the people we want to listen to.
Yeah. And also, it's important to realize, for a whole generation in American evangelicalism that wasn't fundamentalist, almost everybody relied on Messer's book, his textual commentary. And realizing that this is obsolete and that Messer, his whole academic career after the 60s, this guy, his whole time, is writing with the premise in the background that the Byzantine text is later. So making that shift, he's having this one source be wrong to replacing with a different model, that's not going to happen overnight.
Mm-hmm.
So going from a standard Alexandrian text and saying that is the standard, that's the ESV, the S being standard, or the Holman Christian standard, the S being standard, or the New Revised standard. How does this new standard be there? And all goes back to this assumption of the Lycian restriction. Without that in the picture, the whole thing falls apart, and you have to restart with all locales being considered and compared. And that will take time.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I appreciate you kind of being at the tip of the spear in this, trying to push for that. So with all of this discussion about, I've got two final questions for you. With all of this discussion about, hey, we need a new model, we need a new standard, we need a new Greek New Testament so that the standard doesn't change every few years. How confident can we be right now with how things are, not where they could be, but where they are right now, that I can open up my Bible? And again, I know there's lots of different versions. We're not talking about the Message or the Passion Translation, which, it's like pop song theology and those things. But if I utilize an ESV or an NASB or a King James, and I know they're based upon different things, but how confident can I be that what I have access to right now is what was in the autographs and that it was faithfully preserved 2,000 years down to Matt's Bible?
I will give you the long answer first.
Okay.
I am extremely confident the message conveyed by the Byzantine, that's the Robinson and Pierpont Greek Byzantine text is the same message conveyed in the autographs of the books of the New Testament. As far as the exact form, no, not 100%.
Mm-hmm.
But I see no justification to abandon Greek evidence the way the Nessie Island compilers did in the latest edition of the Nessie Island text.
Mm-hmm.
In 2 Peter 3:10, they set aside all Greek evidence to go with what is basically a conjectural recommendation, a reading that is not found anywhere. It's like all these guys, these scholars who would say, "Oh, you King Geolius, you just don't have enough manuscripts." Well, they have now reversed themselves and are going in 2 Peter 3:10 because the reading has no manuscript evidence in Greek.
Gotcha.
At the same time, it is not necessary to resolve every textual context where the evidence is finally balanced.
Mm-hmm.
In rare cases, we should treat our conclusions tentatively and boldly be content with the vagueness and keep testing everything.
Got it.
That is what we do every day. We walk by faith and not by sight.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't make us blind. It makes us faithful.
Yeah. So I'm going to distill that down into probably, like I mentioned in the beginning, the last question I was going to ask you was this question. Can I trust my Bible? There we go. And it could be better, but because of the redundancy that we have, we can trust what we say, but we need to be diligent to study to show ourselves approved and not be afraid to dive into these things, because textual criticism is not where faith goes to die. I can tell you, having not really discussed this a lot, and I think a lot of times churches are afraid. I think Bible colleges are afraid to dive into these things. I have had my faith strengthened through diving into these questions that I probably, without doing this podcast, never would have done. I mean, it takes me sometimes 80 hours to write one of these episodes, between all the research that I do and the reading the patristics and studying the Greek and studying the Hebrew and all of these different types of things. My faith has been utterly strengthened to where I actually take a step back and I say, I see the handiwork of God in what he did in giving this magnificent writing that he spent 1,400 years creating over to the hands of fallible people who were going to make mistakes. And the way that he has preserved this through all the different lines and streams and variants and locales, and the redundancy inside the text and the prophecies and the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, which let us know that the prophecies weren't written back into the Old Testament from New Testament perspectives. All of these things just come together and validate. When I sit down and read my Bible, I can trust what it says.
Yeah. Also, I would say, don't go it alone. I like to read the Bible when it comes to textual criticism, like you would have a good meal with friends.
Yes.
Go slow, savor each bite. Now and then, switch forks.
That's a good analogy. Switch forks. Get a different source to feed yourself.
Yes. Yeah. See what the other person thinks.
Yes.
Iron sharpens iron.
Great. Well, James.
So for those with doubts, I would say, first thing, don't go it alone.
Yeah.
I would say, it comes out to textual criticism. If I had my druthers, I would be going to churches all over the world saying, these are the variants, and here's what you should think about them. That's part of the reason why I wrote that book. So, certainly I would say, textual criticism is a great place to dive in, not for faith to die, but for faith to flourish.
Faith to flourish. Excellent. And James, could you plug your website for us one more time?
Yes. I have a blog, www.thetextofthegospels.com. I also have my book website, which is jamessnappjr.com. All my major books are there. They're both coming along. My textual commentary on the Gospels will be coming out this year. And when that comes out, I'll change the website to keep that there. Those who want to email me, get a free copy, can just email me. My email's at the website, james.snapp@gmail.com. So all that is online. Also, if you go to my YouTube channel, there's a course that covers many of the same things that I have in my book. And anybody that wants to know more can go there and take that free course.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I'm not completely through with your book. I'm reading it very slowly, but one of the things I love about your book, chapter 2 is all glossary. And being able to define those terms gives you a good working knowledge of how to be able to go forward. So, like I said, I'm going to link to the book or to the website so you can buy the book. So that you can get that. I highly recommend it. It's tremendous. So James, I want to thank you very much for coming on the podcast today. And like I said, next episode, what we're going to do, there's so many application things that we can actually cover from here. So what Jeremiah and I are going to do is kind of break some of the really great points of this podcast down and expand on them a little bit, because I just appreciate the wealth that you've given us here. So James, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. And I'm Matt, minus Jeremiah today. And remember, curiosity may have killed the cat, but it doesn't have to kill you. And please make sure you like and subscribe and check us out on Spotify and YouTube. Thanks a lot and have a great day.